All right, thank you again so much, Trish, for that welcome, and I'm very pleased to be here. Okay, so yes, today I'm talking about trauma-informed teaching and course design, and particularly focusing on the whys and the hows. All right. First of all, I'd like to thank you, Trish, for inviting me today, and also thank you to Sophie and English Australia for continued support and promotion and interest in my work. I really appreciate that. Okay, so an outline of today. First of all, why is trauma-informed TESOL important? And then why it should be the norm or the default setting. Some basic trauma-informed principles from the literature. And then from my research and experience, the basics of trauma-informed teaching and management, center management, and some basics of trauma-informed course design. And you can see there that's from my website, and I'll give you that again at the end because there's plenty of stuff you can access there. Okay, so first of all, why is trauma-informed TESOL important? Traumatic effects are very, very prevalent in the global population. And when I say traumatic, I'm talking about really significant trauma, such as threat to life. In Australia, we are a safe and lucky country. However, of course, we have a lot of devastating natural disasters. We're not immune to interpersonal violence, serious illness, accidents, and so on. So probably somebody here right now has undergone a significant trauma, including me, as well as me. Not everybody who goes through that trauma develops post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD, but about 8 to 10% of the population do, and this would be higher depending on where a person is from. PTSD is further exacerbated by pre- and post-migration and acculturation stress, and students might be experiencing loneliness, feeling like they are visibly different or can't communicate the way they want to be, the way they want to. They might experience discrimination or racism. And of course, learning itself can be stressful, especially if students are spending a lot of money. Maybe their family have put all their money into the family member's education, or the student themselves are paying a lot for their education. There is literature around second language anxiety and foreign language anxiety, but this mostly puts the burden on the student and kind of says that it's the fault of the student's own neurosis or negativity, and so it's really not helpful at all. As Sam said, there are a lot of barriers to diagnosis and treatment. And so students may not even know they have PTSD, or even if they suspect it, they may not be able to get that treatment. But most importantly is that recovery from PTSD requires more than just seeing a psychiatrist or a psychologist. The social environment is all important, and psychiatrists who specialize in PTSD also emphasize this. So the learning environment, especially in ELICOS, where the students are in the course 20 hours a week, it's really, really important that that be trauma informed. The learning environment can minimize or exacerbate post-traumatic stress, and so that will affect learning. We know from a lot of scientific studies that post-traumatic stress affects verbal learning, the rate of second language acquisition, and also memory, concentration, and engagement. It can also manifest as physical pains, cause sleep disturbances. Students might seem like they're not interested. They might seem like they're bored, or they might seem angry, or alternatively, they might be the class clown. You just never really know what's going on beneath the surface. So because we don't know who is experiencing post-traumatic stress, it's just a good idea to assume that you're going to have at least one traumatized student in the classroom, and frequently you'll have many more. And so just by practicing trauma-informed teaching all the time, that's going to support all students, but particularly those who have experienced trauma. At its core, trauma-informed is really just human-informed, because these principles of trauma-informed practice are basic human needs. It's just that they are felt more acutely by somebody who has experienced trauma and is having post-traumatic stress. It also keeps the brain in a state that's receptive to learning. So when the amygdala is triggered and the brain goes into fear state, we can't learn anything. You would know that from your own experience. If you're very, very stressed by something or you're afraid of something, you're not going to be able to concentrate or process things very well. On the other hand, when the brain is in a state of safety and connection, that's when it is ripe for learning new things and processing this. So some basic trauma-informed principles, these come from the literature that's very multidisciplinary: psychiatry, psychology, social work, a whole range of associated disciplines. The first one, safety, physical and emotional safety, belonging and connection, so being seen and heard. And in the speech bubble there, am I safe and do I matter? These are really the core of trauma-informed practice. Having agency, choices, and voice, trust, being trusted, and being able to trust others. A recognition of strengths, having others recognize your strengths and not just looking at what you can't do or what's wrong with you, so to speak. A valuing of identities, having a sense of justice and fairness that's in the environment, and having meaning. Now, happily, these align very closely with many of the principles of critical and humanizing pedagogies. And I'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. So some basics of trauma-informed teaching and management that came out in my research. The key principles are teacher understanding and attunement, cultural responsiveness, power sharing, freedom, and creating autonomy, and collaborative learning. And I'll go through these one by one. So the first one, I've put it in a diagram here to make it clearer. What I found from the participants in my research was that when teachers are highly attentive to students, paying attention to their work, to them personally, listening closely, answering their questions really carefully, investing in that conversation, even though it might be hard because of language issues, that leads to being attuned to the student and being able to really understand them. And once the teachers can understand what the students needs, they can respond to that and even anticipate it. And the students talked about cultural needs, personal needs, and academic needs. And they said that this led to outcomes such as a feeling of safety, belonging, connection, motivation, self-belief, confidence, the willingness to take language risks, and that led to agency. And all of this together, they reported, led to learning. And as one of the participants said, it was so easy, the relationship, it was so easy for me to ask questions, even if it's not right. I will feel confident because the relationship, it just gives you confidence to ask whatever you want, even if it's wrong. This is something that I thought was happening in the classroom, but I hoped it was happening, but I didn't know. And then my research has brought this out. So that was really interesting. Students are very canny, and they are aware of when teachers are just transactional. They feel devalued by this. So having that that sense that the teacher is interested in them just makes a huge amount of difference. The next one is cultural responsiveness. So this has a few aspects: respect for and valuing of their cultures, ethnicities, and religion. And we know from prior research that trauma increases sensitivity to nonverbal cues, and exclusion increases sensitivity to belonging. So students, in other words, will be very sensitive to any tiny signs of either acceptance or rejection. And what might seem like small gestures to us will become very big gestures to them. So even, wishing people a Eid Mubarak, or recognizing their different festivals, and so on, can make a massive difference to how people feel in the classroom, whether they're safe there or whether they're being judged or excluded in some way. It's also about not being ethnocentric and having an awareness of our own cultural ways of thinking and communicating. I used to think that I was not Australian at all, and I lived overseas for about 10 years. I thought, I'm not Australian. And then it wasn't until I did my master's and I did a subject in intercultural communication, I realized that I'm completely a product of my culture. Having a multicultural syllabus is really important. Students like to see themselves represented, and also seeing others represented. One participant said to him it represented seeing all the different types of people in his learning materials made him feel like it was representing people from different religions and races living in harmony. A sharing of cultural perspectives and experiences. I'll go into that a bit more later. And also having an understanding of culture shock, and that students might be struggling in some aspects of their lives while they're here. And that, of course, is going to impact on the classroom. They can't just shut it out any more than we can. So the next part is about power sharing and creating autonomy. It's really important for there to be equality and egalitarianism in the classroom. So this refers both to teachers and student to student. We don't want to treat students like they're children, blaming and shaming. Shame is very closely related to trauma. Unfortunately, some students do still experience being treated like kids in the classroom, being yelled at, or just treated generally like they are not adults, and they're very much aware of this, and it doesn't help them to be in a good state for learning. We should respect choices of students, but don't overwhelm them with options. For example, curate a selection of supplementary materials, or give them a couple of choices with assessments. Likewise, with seating, the participants said they were happy for teachers to just decide where everyone was sitting. And I found that in my last class, which had a lot of refugee background students who'd gone through some really horrendous trauma, they usually said to me, please teacher, you decide the seating, you decide the groups, we don't want to do it. And also culturally, some students might think, well, that's the teacher's job and my job is to learn. Of course, treat problems with solutions and compassion, not authoritarianism. Like if a student's late, no need to say, oh, why are you late? Even though it can be very, very irritating if a student is always late. Think of how you feel when you come late to something. You're usually flustered and stressed out, and it's not going to make it any better if somebody berates you for it. It's good to let students know upfront at the beginning of the course and repeat this, that they can leave the class if they feel overwhelmed or very stressed and need to get air or a drink or something. Often students won't feel like they can ask that, especially if they come from a culture where that is not the norm. Of course, like in any good TESOL class, increase the student talk time and decrease the teacher talk time. Also, you can boost autonomy through the use of familiar and culturally relevant materials and tasks. Students do feel a lot more confident when it's something they already have knowledge of, whereas if it's a new concept and new language, that can be a bridge too far. So you want to just introduce new language, not new concept. not a whole new material at the same time. And of course, regular and encouraging feedback gives students a lot of confidence. As they put it to me, it gave them a lot of courage. The teacher just gives us so much courage when they give us nice feedback. That doesn't mean that we can't point out their mistakes. They wanted to hear that, but don't focus only on what they're doing incorrectly. Let's see, 4:28. So I've got 4 minutes, I think. Okay, the next part is collaborative learning. So students said that there were a combination of things. First of all, the relevant culturally responsive syllabus and approach. This gave them the motivation to communicate with their peers in English for a couple of reasons. For some, it was cultural pride. Oh, I want to talk about my culture and share my culture with you. And for others, it was curiosity about the cultures and backgrounds of others so they could compare it and learn something interesting and learn about their classmates. So this led to interactive and collaborative learning. And together, these three things led to students having a sense of acceptance and belonging from their classmates. They had increased understanding of others, and they said that it led to a changed sense of self and the worldview. And so overall, this became transformative second language learning. Even though they were in high stakes courses, they wanted to learn more than English, and having a new outlook on life or discovering new parts in themselves was one of those outcomes that was really valued. A few management basics. Managers, be approachable and transparent. And of course, the same goes for teachers. Ensure a physically safe campus. And where possible, classrooms with windows, access to nature and to quiet spaces. These are really important. Students, especially if they've been through trauma, do not want to feel trapped. Be consistent and predictable about policies and decisions. Don't make students feel like they're under surveillance. I know we have to keep roles and we have all these reporting responsibilities, but there are different ways to do it. Collaborate on decisions that affect the students, like changing a teacher in the level. Don't just make a unilateral or a blanket rule about something. Talk about it. A really big one, don't separate family members where possible. Of course, sometimes if they're in a different level, of course, they will have to be in separate classes. But if students in the same family are in the same level, let them be in the same class. And if they're in the same class, let them work together. I've seen some horrible repercussions where that was not allowed. And it might be hard for us to imagine, but when somebody has been separated from their family by repressive regimes or any number of situations, that is a very big source of trauma, and we do need to keep our connections and bonds. Minimize internet solutions. I'm sorry, my cat's meowing in the background. Minimize internet-based solutions. It's always better to do things in person if you can. All right, and the last thing is trauma-informed course design. So please avoid triggering subject matter that's really obviously triggering, like wars and disasters, terrorism, death and violence. I've seen all of this in English language textbooks. All of them seem to have a unit on natural disasters. It's not necessary. Look at the grammar, what are the language goals, and then think about how this can be achieved elsewhere. Do they really need to know that vocabulary? Of course, some students will bring up their experiences, and that's fine. Give them the space to do that, but don't make it a matter of their coursework or assessment to be confronted with that. Make content culturally rich and strengths-based, as I've talked about, and also, as I've talked about, give the students many opportunities to share and exchange their culture, and that should be embedded at a course design level. As I said before, relatable content is really important, because if the human brain gets too much, too new, too soon, it goes into fight or flight, and that's not even the traumatized brain, that's just brains in general. And if possible, give some students some input into the course content. For a few years, I was able to do that. I'd give them a list of different units we could cover as a theme, and they would vote on them, and it made them really, really engaged and excited about what they were studying, and felt like they had a voice. All right, so I think I'm just on time. That's good. I do have a LinkedIn group, Trauma Informed Adult TESOL International Special Interest Group. Please join that. You can connect with me on LinkedIn here. That's my email address and my website. You can enter via either address, humaninformedtsol.com or traumainformedtsol.com. It comes to the same website. So any questions for me? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tori. That was absolutely fantastic. And there's so many positive comments about your talk in the chat.
Oh, thank you.
I'm really acknowledging that this is such an important topic, considering what everybody has been through. So thank you so much. I don't think we have time for questions
that's
now,
all right.
But if people can still pop questions into the chat, Tori, if you want to hang on and have a look, you might be able to answer some
absolutely.
there.
Yeah.